Okay, let's jump right in. For decades, we've all been told a very specific story about what psychiatric medications do. But what if that whole story is just plain wrong? Today we're going to explore a radically different way of understanding these medications based on a framework called field-based pharmacology. It's essentially a brand new map of the mind.
So on one side, you've got the official story we all know by heart. Medication corrects a chemical imbalance. It's a simple, neat fix for a specific problem. But this other reality suggests something completely different. It says medication doesn't correct anything. Instead, it's more like playing with the knobs on a mixing board for your consciousness. It temporarily changes the fundamental settings of how you experience the world.
And that, of course, leads to a pretty huge question. What if this entire pill for an illness model, the one we've built so much of modern psychiatry on, is actually built on a foundation of sand? What if these tools are doing something completely different than what we've been told?
To really get a handle on this new map, we first have to deconstruct the old one. We're talking about that conventional, disease-centered model, the story we've all been told. It's familiar, it's simple, but as we're about to see, it might be hiding a lot more than it explains.
Now this is where it gets really interesting, because this framework is like a translation guide for the language we use. When we say a drug treats the disorder, what if it's really just creating the right conditions for your own mind to finish a process it was already trying to complete? What we call relapse prevention could actually just be dependency if you're not building the real skills to cope. And my favorite one, side effects. Well, turns out they're not on the side at all. They are integral effects of the drug that we've just decided to label as unimportant.
So why bother with a whole new model? Well, because the evidence for the old one is, according to this source material, built on a contaminated foundation. Now that is a huge claim, so let's break down exactly what it means.
And here's the absolute core of the problem. Pretty much all psychiatric drug research uses categories from the DSM, like major depression, and treats them as if they're real, biological diseases, like diabetes. But they're not. They're just labels for a cluster of symptoms. It's kind of like doing a massive study on things that are blue and expecting to find a single biological cause for the sky, a blueberry, and a sad song. This fundamental mistake, treating a description as a disease, poisons the well from the very beginning.
This brings us to a super important distinction: soft outcomes versus hard outcomes. Soft outcomes are things like changes in a symptom score on a questionnaire. They're unreliable because they're based on those shaky diagnostic labels. But hard outcomes, those are things you can't really argue with. Death, hospitalization, keeping a job. They exist completely outside of any diagnostic framework. That's why evidence that lithium prevents suicide, a hard outcome, is probably a lot more meaningful than evidence it treats bipolar disorder.
Okay, so enough tearing down the old map. Let's start sketching out the new one. Instead of seeing the mind as a broken machine that needs fixing, this model asks us to see it as a dynamic field of consciousness, kind of like a weather system that's governed by a few key parameters. The first parameter is G, for ground or containment. Think of this as your capacity to hold your experiences without completely falling apart. It's your sense of safety, your ability to stay regulated. If your mind is a ship at sea, G is the strength of the hull. Is it solid or is it leaky? Next up, there's gamma, which stands for reflection. This is your ability to step back and observe your own mind in action, your capacity for thinking about your thinking. It's what allows you to make sense of your own patterns and direct your attention. If ground is the ship's hull, gamma is the rudder that lets you steer. Then we have delta squared, which is a fancy name for difference or signal. This is all the new, disruptive, or intense stuff coming into your system. It could be a traumatic memory, a major life stressor, or even a sudden creative insight. It's the signal that your consciousness has to respond to. In our ship analogy, this is the weather. Are you dealing with calm seas or a hurricane? And finally, there's H, the harmonic coefficient. This is basically the big picture of how the whole field is doing. Is it all working together in a coherent way? Is it amplifying into chaos, like in mania? Or is it collapsing into silence, like in a deep depression? It just describes the overall state of the system. So, now that we have this new map with ground, reflection, and signal, we can ask a much smarter question. Not what disorder does this pill treat, but what do these medications actually do to the dynamics of our consciousness? Let's use this map to look at a couple of common drugs. And this quote just says it all perfectly. We're not fixing broken parts, we're changing the dynamics of a system. And that change can either help you grow your own psychological muscles, or it can become a substitute for them, creating dependency. That distinction is absolutely crucial.
So let's take a look at benzodiazepines, like Xanax or Valium. In our new language, what they do is provide a massive immediate boost to G, your ground. It's like putting your consciousness in a concrete bunker. But look at the cost. They absolutely crush gamma, your ability to reflect and learn, and they blunt all incoming signals, your delta squared. So they effectively do the coping for you, but they prevent you from learning anything in the process. It's a very short-term fix with a very long-term cost.
Now let's contrast that with ADHD stimulants. They do almost the exact opposite. They powerfully boost gamma, your reflective capacity. They sharpen your attention and ability to self-regulate. And because you can steer the ship better, your grounding becomes more stable. That's where that famous paradoxical calming effect comes from. Notice they don't just blunt the signal. They help you filter it, improving the signal-to-noise ratio.
And this really is the punchline. One class of drugs substitutes for a capacity you don't have. The other, in the right situation, reveals a capacity that was in you all along but was just out of reach. That is a fundamental night-and-day difference in what these tools are actually doing. So what does all this mean in the real world? How does this new map actually change things? Well, it gives us a completely new compass for making decisions, one that helps us move away from a logic of just suppressing symptoms and toward a logic of liberating a person's own potential.
So, instead of simply matching a diagnosis to a drug, this framework gives us 4 much smarter questions to ask. First, what parameter is actually the problem here? Is it a shaky ground, poor reflection, too much signal? Second, is a pill the only way to deal with that? Third, and this is the most important one, will this intervention help this person build their own capacity, or will it get in the way? And finally, number 4, what's the exit strategy? How do we plan to get off this medication from day one?
And this right here really summarizes the entire paradigm shift. We move from asking the old question, which medication treats this diagnosis, to asking a much more profound and frankly more human question, what does this specific consciousness need right now, and will this chemical intervention ultimately support or impede that need?
Which leaves us with this final thought to chew on. Maybe the goal was never a life free from problems. I mean, that's just impossible. Maybe the real goal is to develop the capacity to navigate life's challenges with resilience. And the big question this new map forces us to ask is, are the tools we're using actually helping people on that journey, or are they, however well-intentioned, actually hindering it?